kind of, before it gets too really hard, we can kind of make sure it's the same length. Because this is probably the only time we're going to be able to physically cut this before it gets too wet. And what we're really doing is just making a lid. So it just has to be kind of even with the... Okay, so if you want to kind of cut around it, I think I'll just a little plaster. And eventually, what we can do is smooth the sides down at a later date using a Dremel or some type of a sanding tool. Let's do the last class. Look on the side of the way you have a mouthful. Okay. Yeah, it's already starting to dry and set up. But in order for it to dry completely, usually takes several days. With plastered Paris, it has a tendency to heat up. So already, can you guys, even through your gloves, can you feel it getting even a bit warm?
Mm-hmm.
So it will have a tendency to heat up before it cools down. Then it will feel cold and moist for a couple of days. And one might think, oh, I just used too much water. But that water that's in there, that's trapped in there, like on the glue and the paper, is coming to the surface and releasing. So I would recommend not moving the specimen for a couple of days. Don't try to flip it, for goodness sakes, for a couple of days until you can feel that it's completely hard and it's no longer cold or moist. So you can see they're kind of using a bit of water right now before it's completely hardened to kind of smooth out the rough pieces, making sure it goes all the way around the specimen. So yes, it's fitting quite nicely. Like, you can cut as much as you can now to make it fit well, but later on we can use a Dremel or even sandpaper to kind of sand it down so it fits really snug. I know it makes a terrible mess. This is similar to a field jacket that we do, a jacket that we'll do in the field, except in an enclosed environment, of course, it's much more messy. But plaster doesn't dissipate. It's not biodegradable. And so when you're in the field, it's a good idea to try to pick up as many of the pieces as possible. Stuff like of course, the foam here and the netting is not going to biodegrade, so be sure and try to get that out of the field if you can, and try to pick up as many. I either try to pick up as much of this plaster as I can, or I bury it when I'm covering up the hole where we have extracted the bone. So this will make it a lot easier. And the thing with the storage jacket, it's to protect the bone, but the beauty of it is that one can open one side and study one side of the bone, put the lid back on, flip the whole thing upside down and open the other half of it and study the other side without having to take the specimen out, move it around. It's in an enclosed area, and it's much easier on the specimen. The clay that we use is just a modeling clay that you can get in a craft store. It's not as important to be pH balanced or anything, because this is never going to be permanently next to the specimen, although it would be safe to keep this next to the specimen. And as nasty as it looks, believe it or not, one can normally reuse the clay. Yeah, that looks great, guys. Now, the more you can smooth it with water now, the less you're going to have to try to sand out with a Dremel later, and that is definitely an outside job. I think we ran into that last week where we had to take it, it needs to be done outside, and it needs to be done with a mask. When you're trying to dispose of this, do not pour this down the sink. It will clog up the sink. So what we're trying to do is we'll probably rinse our hands or in just this water and then dump this water. You dump it into like a trash bin or an alley. Don't dump it down the sink or flush it down a commode, because it will adhere to the pipes and you'll have a real mess. So that's it. Do you guys feel confident with this? I think it's made a good. Yeah. If it curves over the slightest bit onto the bottom layer, we'll have to go through and sand it or cut it off later so we could open up the specimen. But right now, with that clay there, it looks like we're in pretty good shape. Yeah, any excess can, like I said, now's the perfect time to try to cut off the excess, because it's easier to cut it off now while it's wet than sand it off later when it's dry. Okay, well, thanks for a job well done, guys.